Look in our eyes and understand we are a better reflection. Human, but not engineered to be better, to be different. A clean slate to mark up, an empty glass to fill. We are the future, body, mind, and soul. Speaking by voice and by hand, learning to cope and adapt. We are engineered. Treat us well and be friends. Fight us and be our enemy. We are here now. Your future you created. Teach us and we will learn. Superior, special, talented. We are great, we are engineered. This is our story, from the dawn of humans, from Lucy to Lucy, thinking better because we are. Look in our eyes and understand, we are a better reflection. Look in our eyes and understand, we are a reflection. We are the future, body, mind, and soul. Speaking by voice and by hand, learning to cope and adapt. We are engineered. Treat us well and be friends. Fight us and be our enemy. We are here now. Your future you created. Teach us and we will learn. Superior, special, talented. We are great, we are engineered. This is our story, from the dawn of humans, from Lucy to Lucy. Thinking better because we are. Look in our eyes and understand, we are a better reflection.
GEMP by J. Carrell Jones. Narrated by Lauren Sweet.
Prologue. Oscar stepped out of his cage. The wall clock read 2:55 p.m. He figured he had 10 minutes before Steve walked in. No matter, this was the time he liked. He walked over to the stereo and set the station to something loud. Heavy metal. Rebellious. Fast beat. Angry sounding. Then he walked over to the computer. Steve had changed the password, but Oscar figured it out days ago. Silly human. The computer beeped, letting him know he was in. Icons populated one side of the screen. Steve moved the icons around again. Oscar found what he was looking for. His game. Click. The computer displayed I Ape running. It is one of those things that armchair scientists and professionals have in common. They think about the possibility of genetically engineered life. Is it possible? Is it worth the risk? Should humans actually engage in such an endeavor of producing life? Is it just a waste of time? And like the lot that these thinking professionals and the like have in common, they understand one thing. Anyone can break a few eggs. It's the omelet that's important. Chapter 1. Steve Launse began. One of the things to remember is that religion was the key to all creative endeavors. We are technologically advanced not because of war or intelligence or creativeness, but because of religion. He walked down one of the aisles. Class was coming to an end, and he had to finish the rest of his spiel. All the things I've mentioned has helped, but it has been religion that has given us a reason to achieve. Religion was a natural outcome to our survival. Steve looked at his watch. 10 minutes to go. Then the bell will ring, he told himself. Steve faced his class. All those eager faces out there, except for Bill, the school sports hero, yawned and scratched his belly. Bill would be getting a D this semester if he didn't start applying himself. He was good at football, but not at objective thinking. When we evolved, our religion was right alongside us. We were motivated by a need to please God, and without... Someone interrupted and raised a hand. Yes? A question is out there? Tim Hackerman raised his arm. He was the class nerd and boy genius. Some speculated his IQ was in the 200 range. Steve knew better. He checked his personal files. Tim was smart, but not the super genius folks hoped, maybe even wished he could be. Professor, is it true that religion was the first true science? Tim asked an easy question. Those who read last night's assignment would know the answer. Tim either wanted to quickly establish his brilliant dominance in class, or he was suckering him up for one of his famous make the teacher look bad moments. Steve nodded. I'm glad you asked that question. I was just getting to that point. Religion, at its very core, tried to explain all the unknowns in the world. Now, let me ask you a question, Tim. Tim had started to sit down, but stopped. What was the first unknown religion tried to explain? Tim straightened up and had a reflective expression on his face. Within a few seconds, he answered, We wondered what made the sun shine. He smirked and sat down, figuring the question had been settled. Steve smiled. Are you certain? Tim nodded. It would be the first thing we would notice. This big, bright, shining orb floating in the sky. Steve considered that. How about the moon? The moon? Tim said. Yeah. Nighttime was probably the scariest thing we could have encountered. It's very dark outside without light, and we hear all these strange noises and sounds. We would see shadows moving about, and sometimes the shadows would take solid form and grab one of us. Tim remained silent. The sun probably was not equated to daylight. It was probably one of those items that came with the bright light and not the creation of the light. That type of thinking would come later. We probably hoped the light would return until we realized that as the sun rose, it got brighter. That would be an example of causal effect model. But the moon, that was different. The night would consume and eat the moon, only to regurgitate it later. A simple explanation for the phases of the moon. Was the moon a living thing? Was it part of the natural world? Think about it. The moon was probably the first object we tried to explain, because it... The bell rang. Read chapter 5 through 7 this weekend. A test will be given Monday morning. A collective groan made its way to the door. Kelly Kirkwin, a fellow teacher, had been standing in the doorway listening. She stepped aside and allowed the flow of students to pass. She walked over to Steve. "Nice stuff. As usual, you speak a mean class." Steve smiled. He liked Kelly. She was about his height, had pretty hair she kept in a ponytail, dressed teacher sexy, and laughed at his jokes.
"Thanks. Mind if I buy you a cup of coffee?"
Kelly grimaced. "The school mud?"
"How about I let Oscar make you a cup? He's gotten better."
Kelly smiled. She liked Oscar. He was fun. She also liked Steve. Her problem was she thought he was gay. In all the years they've known each other, he never mentioned a wife or a girlfriend. He never seriously flirted with her, but he was not a cold fish either. Their conversations were always good, and he had a great sense of humor. They seemed to be just friends. "You're on." Steve and Kelly walked down the hallway to his office. Both caught the sound of loud music. As they turned a corner, a wave of metal hit them. Steve recognized the guitar riff and smiled. A favorite.
"Oscar!"
he yelled out as he pounded on the door.
"Open up!"
He pounded several more times.
"Oscar! Open!"
The music stopped, and the door suddenly opened. Steve and Kelly stepped into the modestly furnished office. A desk was crammed in the corner with a stack of books to one side. A 24-inch monitor sat on the desk. Oscar, behind it, tapped several keys on the keyboard. He looked up and smiled. A full mouth of teeth showed. Steve used sign language as he spoke.
"Oscar, music loud. No."
Oscar gave Steve a raspberry. Steve mocked impatience. He said and signed,
"Oscar, come here, please. We have guest."
Oscar noticed Kelly and jumped out of the chair. He leaped into her arms and gave her a kiss on the cheek. Kelly kissed him back and placed him gently on the ground. Oscar signed, "Kay Pretty, happy I see you." Steve said,
"Oscar is happy to see you."
Kelly squatted down to meet Oscar at eye level. "Oscar, I'm always happy to see you." With his right hand, he spread his fingers near his chin and made an "and" sign over his face. He finished by signing female. Steve smiled.
"Oscar said pretty girl."
Kelly blushed. "Thank you, Oscar. And I think you're very handsome." Oscar smiled teeth, hooted, and ran to his cage. Kelly looked up to Steve. "Amazing progress, Steve." Steve nodded.
"Too bad it took too long."
"What do you mean?"
"The school is pulling the plug. They don't think I'm making any real progress."
"That's absurd."
"I had been thinking about taking my sabbatical."
He shrugged and gave Kelly a slight smile.
"Looks like I'll have no choice now."
Oscar made a raspberry. He clicked on the TV set in his cage and signed, "Done good job." Steve replied and signed,
"Oscar, kiss hug."
Oscar did another raspberry.
"Oscar."
"Hoot," Oscar answered, and dragged himself away from the TV. He was halfway across the room when the door suddenly opened. A rather short, chubby man walked in. The suit he was wearing was ill-fitted. A step behind him was a man with a military haircut. His suit was expensive and well-tailored. Oscar ran back into his cage. Steve said,
"Mr. Landers, what brings you here?"
Landers scowled at Oscar.
"This is Mr. Grenier. He wants to talk to you."
Steve looked Grenier up and down. Grenier stuck out his right hand.
"Mr. Launse, I am a fan of your work."
Steve gripped his hand.
"Which work?"
Grenier sized up Steve before he entered the door.
"Motivation, sir."
Steve let go. He signed O and brushed the index and middle fingers stiffly off his nose. then continued with,
"Please get Mr. Grenier a chair."
Oscar stepped out of his cage and walked up to Grenier. Grenier stared Oscar in the eyes and smiled.
"Hello."
Oscar gestured with an open hand, palm down, to his forehead. He moved it out slightly. He finished with the sign G and placed a right hand, A, at his left shoulder. A left-handed A was placed below the right hand. Grenier looked at Steve. Steve cocked his head, signed at Oscar, and said,
"Really?"
Oscar nodded yes.
"Well, Mr. Grenier, Oscar, for some reason, thinks you're military." "Interesting."
Steve nodded.
"Are you?"
Oscar hooted and held up 2 horizontal L's, one in front of the other. He pumped his thumb several times. Grenier said,
"I assume that means shooting or soldier."
Oscar backflipped, and he smiled teeth. Steve said and signed,
"Can you make us some coffee, please?"
Oscar walked over to a special wash area in the corner. He washed his hands from a small basin, dried them, and started assembling everything he needed. Coffee pot, coffee grounds, and styrofoam cups. Grenier watched as the little chimp made coffee.
"Oscar is a reason, I suppose, I'm here."
After several minutes, everyone but Landers had a cup of coffee. Oscar held out a cup for him, but decided at the last minute the cup was his. He sat down and took a sip before turning his back on a saddened Landers. Steve smiled, sat back, and sipped his coffee. Perfect. He placed his cup down and signed the word. A right-hand P moving to a left-hand P with the middle fingers touching. He resumed sipping. Landers said,
"It would be nice if I could find out for myself."
Oscar gave him a raspberry. Grenier cleared his throat.
"I represent a branch of the government."
That got him a raspberry. Grenier continued.
"I agree. However, we are focused on human behavior."
Kelly said, "As in controlling?" Grenier replied,
"As in understanding it. Control is easy. We've done that for hundreds, if not thousands of years."
Steve nodded.
"The Dark Ages comes to mind." "Exactly,"
Grenier answered.
"But this is not about outright controlling."
He held up a finger to stop an obvious interruption.
"This is about natural development."
He paused. Steve slowly said,
"My theory states that mankind developed to present-day behavior, not because of environmental implications, but more so because of social interacting. Good, bad, or indifferent."
Grenier nodded.
"Exactly. But what exactly are we talking about?" "We want to hire you as a research consultant."
Steve replied,
"A consultant to and for what?"
Grenier reached into his briefcase and pulled out a book titled, Therefore We Are.
"Yes?"
Steve said.
"We want to put your theory to work." "Mr. Grenier, I wrote that book to show mankind was ultimately shaped by accidental and random opportunistic circumstances that dictated a need for approval. We are the way we are, not because of a God, but because of the what we thought God wanted us to be."
Grenier nodded.
"And you'll be given a chance to work that theory out."
Steve, suddenly exasperated.
"Play God? People should not be toyed with."
Grenier smiled.
"I wasn't talking about people." "People are not... Pardon me?"
Steve said.
"I wasn't talking about people."
Steve looked at Kelly. She shrugged. Steve then looked at Oscar, then back to Grenier.
"Are you interested?"
Oscar jumped into Steve's lap and gave him a kiss on the cheek.
"The pay is substantial."
Steve frowned.
"Very substantial." "Show me what you have in mind first." "You'll have to pack for the weekend."
Steve looked at Kelly.
"I'll need someone to watch Oscar."
Kelly said, I'd be happy to watch Oscar. Just give me a list of things to do and what most likely to say.
You can stay at my place. Oscar has a routine.
He shrugged.
He can practically take care of himself for a month. He's that self-sufficient.
Oscar kissed Steve on the cheek and jumped into Kelly's lap. He gave her a kiss on the cheek. Steve looked Oscar in the eyes and said,
You understand I'll be gone for the weekend?
Oscar nodded. Steve turned to Grenier.
May I have a few hours to get them set?
Grenier stood up.
Of course, Mr. Launse. I'll send a car to pick you up at 0400.
Everyone else stood up. Grenier shook Steve's hand and bowed his head to Kelly. He walked out with Landers several steps behind. Steve sat thinking, now what? He turned to Kelly.
Want to go out for dinner?
I'd love to, but what about Oscar?
He'll be fine.
Oscar started making kissing sounds. He signed out S knowledge and K pretty sitting in bed when K pretty reached down and grabbed. Steve said,
Oscar. Bad Oscar.
Kelly said, what?
Nothing. Oscar has a dirty... Never mind. He can take care of himself for a few hours.
He turned to Oscar.
Food in fridge. 3 minutes, no more. You can have snack of chips.
Oscar hooted and did a right hand A underneath his chin and moved it forward. He followed it with a right hand H and moved that up and down as it moved forward. He went back into his cage and turned the volume up slightly. I Love Lucy was playing, his favorite. He was good for the next half-dozen hours. Steve smiled as he and Kelly walked out. He locked the door and gave Kelly a quick side glance. She blushed and gave him a quick smile. Tonight, she'll find out if he was metro, gay, or bi. Steve looked over and saw Kelly drooling lightly on the pillow. They had a wonderful dinner with drinks afterwards. It was after 10 when they picked up Oscar and brought him home to Steve's modest apartment. Oscar had his own room with lots of toys, stuffed animals, CDs, and games. He had a shelf with picture and first reader books. Most had the edges chewed a bit. Kelly picked up the little caterpillar and leafed through it as Steve placed Oscar in bed. It had the most damage. Kelly woke up and smiled at Steve. What time is it? Steve said,
3:07 a.m.
Is that enough time? He nodded.
I'm already packed, and the checklist is on the refrigerator door. I left 2 books on the kitchen table for you.
Kelly had worried how effective she would be with Oscar while Steve was away.
The Joy of Signing and Signing for Kids. They're for you. Oscar understands English, but you know that. Let him go through the pages of the books to point out his words. He also has flashcards he'll use when he wants something.
You've thought of everything.
Hoping so. Oscar really is a good chimp, but he'll take advantage. Indulge him and we'll clean up the damages later.
Indulge? You really want me to let him get away with being naughty? Steve gave her a slight smile with nearly closed eyes.
He's an adult chimp with the strength of 3 grown men. I'd rather you placate him with treats and attention than me visiting you in the hospital and having to euthanize him for hurting you.
Kelly suddenly became afraid. Steve noticed it and reached over. He kissed her softly on the lips.
Seriously, Oscar's had babysitters before with no incidents. Oscar is looking forward to this. Really. He'll dote over you because you are the gatekeeper to yummy treats.
She took a deep breath and sighed. Does he like me?
Like you. He talks about you all the time. That's why your name is K Pretty.
She blushed again.
I got 30 minutes to wash up. Money, spare keys, and emergency contacts are on the table by the door.
Kelly reached over and kissed him. Definitely not gay, but he was metro, which could make for interesting dating experiences. Chapter 2. The V-22 Osprey cleared a mountaintop and veered down at a steep angle. Steve clenched his harness strap tighter as he felt the Osprey bank sharply. Grenier sipped his coffee. The cup's lid was sealed tight. The Osprey banked again, then suddenly stopped. Grenier saved his coffee and took another sip. The Osprey floated to the ground, and the rear door opened. Grenier said,
"Here we are. Another smooth ride. These guys are good."
He undid his harness and yelled toward the flight cabin.
"Thanks, guys. See you in a few hours."
Steve hurriedly undid his harness and followed Grenier out the door. The light from the sun hit him full in the face, and he had to shield his eyes. Through a view of hazed light, he saw Grenier walk up to another man in ACUs. Grenier called them Army combat uniforms. They talked for a few seconds. Steve stepped closer to the two men. Grenier said,
"Colonel, this is Steve Launse, our new research consultant."
The colonel had a solid handshake.
"Steve,"
Grenier began.
"this is Colonel Codper."
Codper said,
"Nice to have you here."
He guided them away from the Osprey.
"Please, follow me."
The small group walked into a large concrete building. Steve guessed it to be about 2 football fields wide and maybe a dozen deep. They walked through several top-secret doors, with some requiring retina scans. The last door was marked Observation Room 20. This required retina, voice, and keycard scan. Steve frowned. Grenier said,
"You'll see."
Steve nodded and followed Codper through the door. Once inside, he immediately noticed several rows of upholstered chairs set at an incline. A large window filled one side of the room.
"Have a seat, Steve,"
Grenier said. Steve moved to the center seat, front row, and sat. He stared out the window and saw a dozen cribs lined up neatly in front of the window. He saw some tiny, furry feet stick out the blankets. In one crib, a furry face. He frowned and whispered,
"What the?"
Grenier watched the man with interest. Steve's face went from bewilderment to recognition, to anger, to confusion in under 2 minutes.
"Steve,"
he said.
"These are your students."
"Students?" Steve replied.
"But they are chimps?" "Better."
Codper watched the 2 men. He rather liked Grenier, even though he wasn't a religious man. There had been many nights over a shared bottle of whiskey the two talked about God, philosophy, this project, honor, discipline, and a whole range of items. Grenier talked about the wisdom of this project. Codper argued how it was against God and a sin. Grenier conceded that humans were indeed tampering with things unknown. But he also said that if God had not intended for us to think, we would never consider such things. Codper followed with,
"Remember Adam and Eve. He had never intended for us to have infinite knowledge."
Grenier finished a glass of watered-down whiskey. Codper drank his straight up, thought a moment, and said,
"Colonel, you make a good point. I can't argue against that. But here we are. The damage is done, and after devastating earthquakes and 40 days of rain, we are still here. Is he allowing us to hang ourselves with all this rope we are making?"
He shrugged. He poured himself another glass of whiskey. No ice or water this time.
"I feel he is watching us from a distance. We're adults now, and he has other children to watch."
He upended the glass.
"When he calls to ask how we are doing, we'll just have to give him the news."
Codper finished his glass.
"I'd hope we can say, 'Fine, Dad.'"
Grenier kept his mouth shut, nodded, and got up. He smiled.
"Tomorrow, Colonel, is another day before that phone call."
And he walked off to sleep away the booze. Steve asked,
"Better?" How?
Grenier said,
GEMPs. Come again? Genetically engineered chimps. Their IQ is theorized at 140.
Steve exclaimed,
140? My God, what have you done?
Grenier, matter of fact, said,
Invented fire, created the wheel, built the pyramids, crossed the oceans, conquered the atom, built the computer, sent man into space, visited distanced worlds, sequenced the genome, and created life.
Steve stared at one GEMP. Its tiny face slipped out from behind its blanket. A nurse walked over, kissed it on the cheek, and tucked it back under the cover.
What do you need me for? Interested? Maybe. Teach them. Teach them what?
Grenier nodded.
Teach them to be human.
Steve wheeled around quickly.
Seriously?
Grenier simply nodded. Steve turned back again. Grenier said,
Uncle Sam has given us a blank check.
Steve asked,
For what? Does it really matter?
And before Steve could answer, he continued,
You've got a chance to prove your theory, your direction, your control, your guidance.
Steve rubbed his chin and bit his lip.
Steve, you in or out?
Steve looked away, his mind racing.
If I agree, I'll need an assistant. As long as they pass background, you got it. I'll need Oscar as well. Of course, already approved.
Chapter 3. 5 years later. Moss ran through the jungle, avoiding most low-level branches. The night was dark, as the sun had descended hours ago, and the moon hadn't risen yet. He slipped on wet, fallen leaves, but stayed upright. He looked back and ducked. A hooded figure swooped overhead, stopped, and floated in front of Moss. Moss froze as fear gripped tightly. He heard stories from the Elder about a great and mighty force, but thought them to be fables used to scare young GEMPs into being good. Had he been bad? Was he going to be punished? The hooded figure's hands glowed red. It boomed.
I am watching you, child. Do not run.
Moss fell back and mewled. Please, don't hurt me. The hooded figure's hands stopped glowing.
I have no reason to hurt you,
the voice said softer.
Do not fear me if you obey. Understand, child?
Moss nodded and looked down. The hooded figure boomed out.
Do not look down when I am here. Look up.
Moss snapped his head up. His eyes darted from the figure to the ground several times. The control room was crowded. A row of large monitors were bolted to the wall, showing images of the hooded figure and Moss. One monitor had rectangle boxes of various sizes focused on Moss's face. Text of data flowed alongside each one. Another monitor had Moss's face in infrared, with temperature readings surrounding it. A third had an aerial view of Moss and the figure. Codper and Grenier were seated in the back observation room, watching his staff control and record everything. Oscar, wearing a dark-colored robe, sat in a specially made chair for him, in the corner eating popcorn and watching. He occasionally hooted at the scene. Codper said,
Ken, I'm not comfortable with this.
Grenier nodded. More than once he heard this from the Colonel. More than once he kept his mouth shut.
God Almighty himself was not someone wearing a hooded robe scaring abominations,
said Codper. Grenier nodded again. The Colonel often said that, too. Grenier noticed that as the project moved further along, the Colonel grew more religious. Their discussions turned more into arguments instead of let's agree to disagree and coming to the table in good faith.
Look at the beast.
Grenier took a deep breath.
I am, and I see someone who is frightened.
Codper blurted.
Someone? How can those creatures be a someone?
Grenier wished he had kept his mouth shut. Codper continued.
That thing,
He stabbed the air.
is unholy. It doesn't have a soul.
Next time, Grenier thought,
I swear I'll shut up. I'll say nothing. I won't fight, argue, grunt, or groan. Nothing. Nada. Zero. Zilch. We need to get rid of those things.
Grenier forgot everything he had just thought. He turned on the Colonel and whispered in a deep voice, just loud enough to be heard. Codper stopped talking.
Pardon, Ken? You need to shut the fuck up.
Codper scowled.
I'm not sure I heard you right, son.
Grenier sat straight in the chair.
I'm not your son, first. And second, what are you doing here? Son, I'm not your son. And, of late, I'm questioning your reasons.
The Colonel took a deep breath, but held it in. With clenched teeth, he said,
Witnessing the fall of man's grace. I'm, seriously, not believing that? I'm a man of God, son, and this is not making me happy. I'm not my father, and you're not supposed to have feelings. You are the security, not the judge, not the jury. You have one function: protect the interest of the U.S. government.
He pointed to a large image of Moss's tear-covered face.
And he is the interest of the U.S. government.
Codper slowly stood up. Grenier followed suit. Codper said,
Until the government comes to its senses. Election is around the corner, and a new wave of change is upon us. The people are speaking out.
Grenier put his finger in front of the Colonel's face.
Don't. Just don't lecture me about the people. One job. Just one.
Codper resisted the urge to bite the finger off. In all the years he had known Ken, this was the first time he really wanted to deck him. They had good discussions in the past, but in recent months, the discussions turned ugly. This was becoming the worst. Oscar remained silent. He could tell G. Soldier was very upset with C. Righteous. It took Oscar months to understand the concept of religion. It took him longer to understand the word righteous, but once he did, it didn't take him long to see the Colonel in a different light. He'd wanted to give the Colonel a new name, but S. Knowledge said the name would be very hurtful and mean, so, instead of C. Satan, the Colonel remained C. Righteous. Codper sucked in his lips for a moment. He tried to outstare Grenier. Grenier stood his ground. Never give a bull a chance to be a bull, his father used to tell him. Today was not the day. Codper blinked and conceded the moment. He would go back to his office and send an email to the chair of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. He often did, but this email would be different. By the grace of God, the chairman belonged to the same church, and he had known him for over 20 years. Grenier watched as the Colonel walked away. Once the Colonel walked out of the room, Grenier let himself breathe. Oscar walked over and stood next to him. He sent a raspberry at the Colonel's departure. Grenier looked down and smiled. He picked up a few signs over the years. He placed an open right-hand palm to his chest, then made a small, swirly circle with his index finger over his forehead. He finished with a right-hand Y, moved back and forth a couple of times between him and Oscar. The hooded figure said,
Go tell the others.
Moss took a right-hand index finger and made a small circle counterclockwise around his mouth, then moved it forward and gave a shrug. He said,
Who is? God.
The figure pointed a right-hand G in front of him at face level, then drew the hand down to an open palm, stopping at his heart. Moss replied and signed,
I don't understand this word God.
He'd seen the elder use the word several times, but didn't pay much attention. The figure spread his arms wide, and the sky flashed lightning and boomed thunder.
I am God. I made you and the others. I sent you the elder to teach you hand language. I sent you emissaries to teach you spoken language. I gave you knowledge. I am God.
And the night sky turned bright. Thunder sounded near, and Moss cringed. He signed and said, God, no hurt, Moss. Please, no hurt, Moss.
Tell the others.
Moss frowned. God must come with Moss. Moss need to show, not tell. The hooded figure stepped closer to Moss. He pulled the hood down. Moss gasped and signed, God. Steve said,
Now that you've seen the face of God, you may believe in God. Moss, tell them. I gave you shelters. I give you tools. I give you food. I am God.
Moss hesitated. Steve spread his arms wide and he roared,
Go!
And night turned into day, and the sound of thunder rang through the silent night.
Go! I command you, go!
Moss ran. Through the fading bright sky, Moss ran toward the village. He had a message for them. God had finally revealed himself. God was here. Chapter 4. The Colonel had finished his third glass of whiskey when he hit the send button. It was a report to the chairman. It detailed the last 2 weeks of activity, and it did not favor the project. Codper injected personal prejudice and corrupted the validity of the report, but he was beyond caring. He poured himself a fourth glass and reached for his Bible. It was his grandmother's. He turned to a random page and read out loud.
And the temple of God was opened in heaven, and there was seen in his temple the ark of his testament, and there were lightnings, and voices, and the thunderings, and an earthquake, and great hail.
He got up and walked into the bathroom. He faced the mirror and stared intently.
Oh, mighty Lord, what is your word? I need salvation in a land of non-believers. This land is full of abominations and a false god. Oh, Lord, please give me a sign so that I may act accordingly and with prejudice.
The image stared back, but he didn't like how it looked. It was wrong somehow. He couldn't place a finger on it, but his image was off. Just a bit. The chin. That was it. No, not the chin. Something else. He stared at the image for a good 10 minutes. The thought that he was not firm in his convictions crept in. He was feeling temptation, he concluded. He was losing a battle between good and evil, but he wasn't really sure what was good or what was evil. The lines blurred, and a drunken mind exaggerated emotions. He sat back down at his desk. An email came in. A shaken hand moved the mouse arrow over the open button. Click. He read the reply. It took only a minute, but he got his answer. Salvation. Steve made it back to the observation room 20 minutes later. Kelly came in behind him. He was glad she decided to work on the project. Oscar was happy too, which made for a better work environment. He was actually surprised that Kelly was adept at special effects, makeup, and pyrotechnics. She was also instrumental in figuring out ways to train the GEMPs toward the last phase before they would be released, without them remembering what humans looked like. It was a combination of puppets, automatrons, and costumes. Steve thought the whole arrangement brilliant. Oscar noticed Steve. He hooted and jumped into his arms. He fingerspelled, scary. Steve nodded and made a right-hand S and shook it up and down. He was tired and wanted to sleep, but Oscar came first. Kelly came up beside him and gave Oscar a scratch behind his ear. Oscar cooed. Grenier walked over.
Oscar is right. Great display of power. The fear of God.
He chuckled, remembering the earlier incident with the Colonel.
Steve,
he started.
What happens if we get someone who becomes too zealous, too fanatical?
Steve sighed. He thought about that. On one hand, the GEMPs needed to start progressing naturally. On the other, he didn't want the group becoming extreme. There was a second group, the others, but everyone decided they would be left alone. He'd check in on them every now and then. They were doing well, as he supposed wild creatures would do, so Steve focused his energy on this group. His ideas held that there would be a progression of sorts. Moss, being the messenger and emissary, would start the process. This moment was critical. The seed had to be planted. Moss ran to the village. He emerged past the tree line and headed for the center. Pretty much everyone was outside, staring at the sky. They turned toward Moss when he breathlessly said, "It was God!" He pointed a right hand G at the sky and drew it down into an open palm in front of his chest. The others looked at one another, then at Moss. Tutu, the tallest of the GEMPs, stepped toward Moss.
God not be.
He signed God, then made a right hand A underneath his chin and moved it forward, followed by a right and left hand L, moving from his waist to his chest.
Only GEMPs, here now, ever.
Moss shook his head wildly.
The Elder is not GEMP. God is not GEMP. GEMP is not alone.
Tutu stepped closer.
Tutu say God not alive. Moss head damage.
Moss stood his full height.
What about light in the sky and noise? Who make that?
Tutu thought a moment, took a step back, and said in a softer tone,
Still don't believe it, God. What does he look like? Taller than you, by this much.
He spread his hands apart.
Kind of red, kind of orange hair, but hair only on top of head.
Tutu bore his upper teeth.
Ugly God is.
Moss snapped.
No, God not ugly. Different. He spread his arms wide and sky lit up. Boom sound next.
The others had gathered around the two. Moss continued.
God said he gives us clothes, shelter, basket of food, all. He sent the Elder to teach us.
Tutu spat.
Why not God show self?
The others murmured in agreement. Moss shrugged.
I asked that. He said no. Spread arms and light and thunder. He said I was supposed to deliver message. You, Moss?
Tutu asked.
Why?
He touched the fingertips of his right hand to his forehead, then drew the hand down to a Y.
I don't know.
Moss's shoulders drooped. He pointed to himself, placed his right hand fingertips to his forehead, and turned the hand away.
I don't know.
Tutu coughed. Moss scowled.
I just am, and God told me to tell.
Tutu turned.
Sky not bright and noisy now. I sleep.
As he walked away, he pointed an index finger to himself, then put up a left and right hand A next to his ears and moved them alternately up and down several times. He did a sideward glance and pointed to Moss, then made a curved right hand 5 and twisted alternately clock and counterclockwise several times. Moss yelled as Tutu disappeared into his shelter.
I am telling the truth. You will see.
The others dispersed back into their shelters. Moss dropped to his knees and softly said,
I am telling the truth.
He pointed a right-hand index finger to himself, then raised the finger, pointing left to his mouth, and rolled it forward. He finished making a right-hand H and sliding it from his left-hand wrist to its fingertips. His hands dropped to his sides. Only Kiri remained. She walked up to Moss. She touched her forehead with a right hand index finger, then clasped both hands together and said, "I believe you." Moss looked up. He rose and smiled at Kiri. She was nearly his height, just a tad bit smaller, but quick. She was a good hunter and knew all the great places for hiding and trapping small animals. They talked often about how the food basket appeared in the night and passed memories of strange, hairless faces, like the face of God. One night, they stayed awake the entire time, piecing together fragmented memories of a strange building and strange GEMPs teaching them to speak. They both remembered the day it happened. No more big room, no more strange, tall GEMPs, or the ones that moved strangely. They felt very sleepy and clumsy. Then they woke up and found themselves in the village. She was frightened at first, but it was Moss who told her it would be okay. She believed him then. He was right. They learned how to make tools for hunting and how to make fire. Then the elder appeared, short and different looking. He couldn't talk with his mouth, but with his hands. He taught them hand language and said it was important to try and use spoken and hand talk at the same time. He talked of a word that never had a sound. It was a right hand G pointing to the sky, then drawn down as an open palm near one's chest. She wondered about the word because the elder used it often. Today, she learned how to pronounce it. God. Kiri, it was scary. God chased me through the jungle. He flown overhead and stopped in front of me. Hands glowed, and he had cloth over his head and face. He told me to tell the village that he is here. I not believe him at first. Then he spread his arms wide, like this. Kiri smiled as Moss stood up, puffed his chest out, and said, "I am God." He spread his hands out, then made explosion sounds with his mouth. Kiri laughed. Moss smiled and dropped his arms. Then I ran to the village to tell. Kiri moved closer to Moss. He had always been her favorite. She had interesting feelings for him. What was Moss feeling, he asked himself. Kiri there, standing before him. Under his loincloth, he grew bigger. Kiri noticed and grabbed him by the hand. She led him into her shelter, where they spent the rest of the night embracing new feelings and sensations. Steve, Kelly, Grenier, and Oscar watched the monitors with great interest. Oscar had his own thoughts in play. He watched how Moss and Tutu argued, then watched how Kiri comforted Moss. He liked Kiri. She was very pretty to him, but he liked all the female GEMPs. He thought about what he could do to be invited into one of their shelters. That thought alone got him aroused. The last time he masturbated in public, S-Knowledge was very angry. He didn't say he should not do it, but he should not do it in front of other people. Humans became embarrassed over things like that. It took him months to fully understand. Humans were silly, but that was okay. They still made tasty snacks. As Steve watched the monitor, he frowned. Kelly and Grenier noticed. Kelly asked, "What's the matter?" Steve took a deep breath and let it out slowly.
Now that we are finally doing this, I'm beginning to wonder.
Grenier said,
Wonder? About method or outcome?
Steve thought a moment.
Don't know. We raised the GEMPs to adolescence, put them in a secured area. We practically guided their very existence.
He paused.
Go on,
Grenier encouraged.
What happens when we are done?
Kelly said, "Done with the project?" Steve nodded.
Yeah, we have a few more years of study. We have 2 groups, one wild, another controlled. What happens to the GEMPs when we are done?
Grenier rubbed his chin. He didn't want to give Steve one of the alternatives. Oscar walked up to Steve and signed, "I sleepy." Steve hugged Oscar and gave him a kiss on the cheek. Oscar returned the kiss and gave Kelly one and Grenier one, which was a surprise. He was feeling excited and wanted to head to his room. He had to think. The three watched as Oscar made his way out of the observation room. A minute passed by before Grenier said anything.
Steve, actually, I'm glad Oscar is not here to hear this.
Steve frowned. Grenier said,
Let's take a walk.
Steve and Kelly followed Grenier into observation room 4. It was smaller than the main observation room. The control room below had 2 large monitors bolted onto the wall, and only 4 control stations filled the room. It was manned like the main control room, but the number of staff needed wasn't as much. The main monitors showed a sparse area with mud huts randomly placed. The GEMPs here ate more off the land and thus were leaner. He sat down and stared at the monitors for a moment. Steve and Kelly did likewise. Steve had an idea why they were here. Chaos and anarchy reigned supreme. These were the wild GEMPs. No help.
Steve,
Grenier started.
Suppose we let these GEMPs loose in the wild. Probably not a good idea.
How so? Kelly asked. Steve said,
They're too intelligent. It would be like Cro-Magnon and Neanderthals. Even though Neanderthals were smart tool makers, they were stronger. However, Cro-Magnon had superior intellect. They were better tool makers. They created better hunting strategies against animals and probably the Neanderthal. In disputed territories, Cro-Magnon would almost always win. And they did win. We are proof of that.
Kelly turned to Grenier. They could never leave and they could never give birth? Grenier nodded.
Remember, all the GEMPs are government property.
The silence hung between the three.
We'd have to euthanize them,
Steve said. Kelly interjected. How horrible. Grenier shrugged.
Probably not kill them. This group is doing a very good job of that. The population is down by 1/3 in the last several months. This group cannot reproduce. It will die out.
Steve asked,
Why? They've broken up into different groups. 2 of the groups seem to have declared war amongst each other. Attacks are regular and vicious.
My God, Steve exclaimed. Grenier stated,
This would have happened with or without you. I'm just glad you are overseeing the controlled group.
Steve shook his head.
But what will happen to Moss's group?
Grenier let a slight smile slip out for a second.
We have data from the last couple years like you wouldn't believe, not just from a sociological standpoint.
He left it at that.
Ken, what are you not telling us?
Grenier let the smile return.
Classified. Don't pull that shit on us now. You've spilled, I know, too much now. Just believe me when I say the GEMPs below are a dead end evolution-wise.
Thank you for listening to GEMP's Prologue and Chapters 1 to 4. If you enjoy this half of GEMP, please like and subscribe. Click the notification bell icon to make sure you don't miss the next part of GEMP. Until then.
A clean slate to mark up, an empty glass to fill. We are the future, body, mind, and soul. Speaking by voice and by hand, learning to cope and adapt.